You know how the car works, but you know how to use it. So for our case study purposes, okay, we jumped a little bit ahead on this. Today we're going to talk about the mechanics of a trust and how a trust really works, maybe give you some better background. And it's not too much more than we're going to build, obviously have new information, but it's not a lot more than what we've already talked about with GRATs, grids, GRATs, GRUTs. Okay, yeah. So we'll talk about some other types of trusts today. All right. And then if we get in early, of course, you can either take the time to work on your quiz or your case study workday. Oh, let me get back to this real quick. Sorry. So coming back on Monday, we'll have exam review, which will be typical, right? We'll have about 15, 20 questions to get your mind jostled back about what we have been covering over. The next exam is only going to be over chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so gift tax, estate tax, transfers during life and trust. So this one's going to be a little bit meaty. All right, probably about 20 to 25 questions. It'll be multiple choice. Even though it's multiple choice, you may have to do some calculations to get to your answer. Just keep that in mind. So next week, not too much, just exam review and then exam. Now, if we finish early on here, I'm going to please ask you're grown people, do whatever you want. Stick around if we get early, we're done with that. If you have questions about the case study, let's use the rest of that class time to work on the case study if you choose to. And speaking of, that is due on the 6th. And this is the 80.1. All right, so top of our head, what do we use trust for? What have we been using it for? Save money on the estate, sure.
To ensure money goes to the next generation or certain assets go to them.
Yeah, to direct our assets and avoid what?
Taxes.
Taxes, yeah, avoid taxes, minimize taxes. What else do we avoid? Probate, right? So there's no point in going through the probate process because we've already talked about, the judge knows where you want your assets to go.
Also avoid lawsuits.
Say what?
Also avoid lawsuits.
Avoid lawsuit, yeah, I would agree with that. We're talking a lot about this today. Okay. All right, so I'm thinking, I don't know if you have these definitions or not, but we're just gonna go through these because if you see this on the quiz, you'll need to know what it is. Okay, a trust, all it is a legal, vest. Okay, it's a structure that vests legal title to assets to somebody who's gonna manage those assets on behalf of somebody else, or according to the trust documents. Now, the trustee has to be a fiduciary, which means they have to maintain the best interests, okay, of the trust beneficiary in their mind. A lot of times they have a lot of flexibility as to when they want to dispose of income or whatever, depending on the trust documents. So it's important that you have a really good trustee for this. Now, we've been through a lot of this. The grantor is a person who creates and funds the trust. Okay, the trustee, by definition, is the individual entity responsible for managing the trust assets. A lot of banks will do this. They'll have a trust department. Okay, handled professionally. The beneficiary is the one from whom the benefit of the trust they receive. Okay, kind of makes sense. We'll talk about different types of beneficiaries. Okay, there's something called legal title, typically held by the trustee, who holds title to the trust assets in order for them to manage those assets. As of course, there's going to be a different type of title. Okay. So we've already discussed the grantor and the beneficiary a little bit when we talk about GRATs. I was just going to say GRATs because that's easier to say, or GRATs. There's CRATs and CRUTs, and then there's CLATs and QUTs and all kinds of stuff. I'll probably sidestep that one. Okay, so you have a beneficial title. This is the one, right, deemed by the trust document who receives the benefit of the trust. The trust document, as you would imagine, contains all the provisions of the trust. How I want the money managed, who gets what happens in the event of this, do you sell the principal, do you not sell the principal? Okay, all of these issues is really important. It's combined in the trust document. Now, because we are in the United States, okay, we are an interstate type of country, right? we have to agree somewhat on how laws are conducted across states. So according to the Uniform Trust Code, according to the book, it's been adopted by 35 states and the District of Columbia. So that means a lot of trust law is at the state level, which is important because CITES, okay, is a state who will govern the trust. So it's really important that you choose the right state with respect to the grantor and beneficiaries, okay, that'll meet your objectives. This is a lot like incorporating. Where do most companies incorporate?
Delaware.
How come?
Some tax applications.
Tax implications, there's a lot of like loose laws in Delaware. It brings a lot of income to Delaware, so this is important. I'm sure there's a lot of states, right, that trust law will dictate. We're just sticking to definitions right now. If you fall behind or anything, just make note, all this is coming directly from the textbook. Okay, so this we've already kind of gone over, but if you see settler, creator, or trustor, okay, these are interchangeable with grantor. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's all fair game when it comes to quizzes and exams. Okay, if you see these types of titles, it means the exact same thing. I was all really happy with this one. Okay, now here's a difference between beneficiaries. Sometimes you have an income beneficiary and a remainder beneficiary. And the best way to look at this is I put an asset in trust, let's just say it's money, an investment that grows, okay? Somebody's gonna get that income throughout the trust term, and then when the trust is done, when it's finished, then the remainder beneficiary gets the assets left over. That's gonna be the difference between the two. Sometimes you can be both. Okay, it's called self-settled trust, the different types of trust. I just want you to understand that these are very, very flexible vehicles. Okay, you can really write a lot of flexibility in here, right? So you're gonna see a lot of trusts that are set up a lot of different ways. Don't get confused, the principles will be the same. You'll have a grantor, and then at some point you have a beneficiary. Sometimes there is no income beneficiary. Sometimes you just have a remainder beneficiary. Sometimes you have an income beneficiary, and then the trust remains back to the grantor. Okay, so these are all kind of flexible going forward. Okay, then somebody's gotta watch, okay, someone who's a grantor trust to make certain decisions regarding the trust. So you have a trustee, I would think this one would kind of keep your eye on the trustee. So you have the trust document, trustee goes by the trust document, you have the trust protector who kind of keeps an eye on everything. Behind this guy watches this all. Okay, so if you are a trustee, or when you assign a trustee to a title, they have quite a few responsibilities. Okay, they are gonna receive the trust title to the property. You are, especially if it's irrevocable trust, you are actually giving those assets up to the trust. So you no longer hold title to these. Okay, they are responsible for the investments of the trust. If there's any income to be collected on behalf of the trust, they're responsible for it. They have to make distributions, it's gonna be up to the trustee to make sure they do this, and if not, they can get in trouble. Their responsibility to keep the beneficiaries informed about what's going on with the trust. If the trust itself, whatever assets are in there has claims, it's their responsibility for enforcing it. They're the living person behind this asset that's taking care of everything on behalf of the administration and the beneficiaries. Somebody wants to sue the business and the trust, it's gonna be up to them to hire the attorney. How many of y'all knew that trusts have tax returns? Before we get into it, is it more favorable or less favorable than income tax?
It was more.
Probably more favorable.
Let's find out.
Why would it?
Anybody have another idea?
I don't see why it would be less favorable.
Why would it be less favorable?
Income tax on a
Well,
trust?
maybe because things are already tax sheltered in the trust.
We'll find out, okay? Let's see here. Y'all have a lot of trust for trusts, okay? This is in the book, this is a simple graph that'll talk about how things are done. So this is the grantor, this is the trust and trustee, this would be the income beneficiary, any kind of, where it's annuity or income, okay? And then you have the remainderment that's gonna receive the property and the trust. And again, these can all be different, they can all be mixed up. I mean, not the parties, but there's flexible about who can be what. Sometimes this is gonna be a charity. Sometimes this will be the charity receiving the income, and then all the properties remanded back to the family, okay, or the settler. It's up to that. I mean, it's up to whoever they wanna set it up. Okay, so why do we use a trust again? I think we talked about it. We want to manage assets in the way that we're supposed to, whether during life or at death. If I pass away, I want to make sure that my business is managed the way I want it to be, at least for a specific period of term. At which point I'd put in a trust. The trustee would be responsible for following my directions. Sometimes people get a bunch of money, a windfall. Uncle dies, they get a chunk of money. They can't manage themselves. They put it in a trust. They'll get their distributions. They'll make sure there's principal that doesn't get used, right? A lot of times, minors, okay, if their parents pass away, they can assets. If it's a testamentary trust, will pass to a trust until they're a certain age. At which point they can take over the business or the asset. Whether it be a house, could be the family jewelry, it could be whatever. Okay, and of course, creditor protection. Now, there's something called a spendthrift clause, which, if this is part of your trust document, it prevents the beneficiary from pledging assets to somebody else. Even if they owe money to whoever, let's say the IRS, where they cannot get all the assets, okay? It's in a trust, there's a spendthrift clause, so it has another layer of creditor protection. They can go also and go get a personal loan for the amount of the money in the trust, so they can do whatever they want with it. At this point, okay, they're restricted to pledge any assets to anybody. And that's how you manage the creditor protection in the trust. And then you have split interest in property sometimes. Sometimes maybe let's say I have children and they're gonna have grandchildren probably. Let's say I have a successful business or an asset is valued, appreciating stock. I put it in the trust. I want my children to get the income. I want their children to get the remainder of what's left over. Okay, so these are what you call split interest. So this is all set up so people don't argue, people don't start dipping into other issues. Okay, this is all for management of assets. Are there gift tax implications for trusts?
When you create it.
When you create it? Yeah. More specifically when you fund it. That's gonna be, yeah, we haven't got there yet, but yeah. A lot of times people create trusts and don't fund them. Maybe they just haven't really decided when to put the assets in there. Sometimes they die before they do, things like that. So, we'll talk about that when we get there.
I guess, does it cost money to put assets into the trust, or can you just create the trust and be like, you?
It costs money to create the trust in general.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sure titling fees that you'll have to manage, administration fees, depends how large the trust is and how complicated your trust documents are. If you have a really complicated setup, then they're gonna look at that and charge you for that. But if you have a very simple setup, then probably not so much. And you don't really need, a lot of people think about this as a lot of value in assets. Okay, you can set up 50 grand, you know, and have this distributed how you want to, if it's worth your while, if you're really worried about certain things. Okay, we talked about that, avoids probate. Now, if it's a revocable living trust, okay, we'll talk, I don't wanna jump too far ahead. That means that if I'm the grantor and I put these assets in the trust, I can take them back. Or I can terminate the trust, it's revocable. okay, I can still have managed, these assets, I kinda get to determine where they go. So a lot of times, okay, this will not avoid your estate tax, because remember, the general principle is if I can still control it, I got my fingers in it, it's not really removed from my gross estate. Now, it will avoid the probate process. Now, a lot of times, these may not be completed gifts, which means you cannot use the annual exclusion. Okay, sometimes irrevocable trust, typically you'll be able to use the annual exclusion, we'll talk about that. You wanna minimize taxes, okay? That's another reason why we use trust. Really, on this case study we're working on, how you're freezing the value of these assets, okay? Passing that appreciation off to a future generation, and avoiding taxation on that future appreciation at the gross estate level. That's what this is specifically, mostly talking about. Now, if it is irrevocable, and for whatever property you put in there, you pass the look-back period, okay, it will reduce your gross estate. Just keep in mind here, this one will not avoid estate taxes. This is really what the case study is all about. Okay, family and partnership. Okay, putting things in the QPRT if you want to. Okay, so a long time ago, I think it was in 15 something or 16 something, the Duke of Norfolk, I think was his name, the book tells you about this story, put his assets into a trust and said that these assets can never be sold. So intentionally, these assets were held in perpetuity for typically forever. Then it was challenged in courts, okay? And you know, a lot of our history and our legal system is based on English law. Anyway, so they had to change this because there's an interest. They don't want property to not remain in commerce forever. Okay, never can you transfer this house, never can you transfer this. So they made rules they call rules against perpetuities. And so we go back and forth. Okay, so you could keep everything in forever in the trust, all right? Then they came up with this rule against perpetuity that said anybody who's involved in this, whether it be a grantor or beneficiary, okay, if they're 0 years old, 2 months old, okay, if they're the youngest one, they whenever their life ends, plus 21 years, that trust needs to be dissolved. Trying to keep assets, okay, and a lot of this was the government wanted to make sure that they received their taxation. Because if it's completely held up and the income stays in the trust, is never distributed, okay? Before they came up with these tax laws on trusts, okay, people were just accumulating wealth. Now you could probably pledge some of this if it didn't have a spendthrift clause. You know, there's ways around it, just like wealthy people now pledge stock and they get income and they pay whatever, how that works, they kind of avoid income taxes. There was a lot against that. Then the states came in and said, all right, 90 years, okay, is where we're gonna stick it at. Trust can remain in effect for 90 years. Now, at the end of 90 years, you can reestablish a new trust with very similar principles. But eventually, at that point, there had to be an opportunity for the trust to vest, okay, at which point people can rearrange the items. Well, they didn't like that either, okay? So now, and I won't test you too much on this because this is a very technical question. This is why there's an entire course on this. If you go to law school, you may decide to go to law, you'll be taking trust law, okay? Now, in certain states, you can set a maximum duration. They'll set it up a certain way between 150 and 1,000 years, okay? But understand that there was at one point a rules against perpetuities, and that this is probably the most important statement, that all interests in trust must vest within the lives in being plus 21 years. So if you get a question like that, that's what we're gonna be looking for.
Or you can set the maximum duration of a trust for 1,000 years.
In some states, in certain circumstances, under the right conditions, that's what it says.
Where the right, I wanna know like what definitions for,
We'll look it up after class, if we get done a little bit early. Yeah, I mean, yeah, grandkids and grandkids and grandkids, but who's to say your country's still gonna be in existence 1,000 years, you
well,
know?
that's the point. It's like, I
That's what
expect
banks
there
are
not
for.
to be,
Well, what if another country takes over another country, then all the laws and banking and all that stuff is gone.
I just wanna make sure that my assets can live until I can officially have my family take over the United States and become the sole monarchs of,
The sole monarchs.
that's all I want.
Okay, so let's take a look at this, okay? Now, the income tax is gonna be specific between a grantor and a non-grantor trust. Okay, so that's what we're going with this, to keep this in mind. We talk about income tax on trust, okay? If a grantor is a grantor trust, okay, revocable, where they still can't contain certain powers or whatever, then all the trust income of that business or appreciation or whatever's going on, they have to file a tax return, will go directly to the grantor. Now, we're gonna talk about simple and complex trusts, okay? Sometimes you can take a trust that would normally be subject to trust tax rules, make it intentionally defective, okay, not that it's not gonna do its job, but for income tax purposes, you're gonna be utilizing, okay, the grantor's income tax. So if that doesn't tell you which one's better, it should, okay? Income tax to the grantor, those are much more favorable rules than income tax to the trust. So if you have to follow trust tax rules, okay, you really wanna find a way to get out of that. Sometimes it's unavoidable, okay? Now, this is a list, I'm not gonna go through all this, I would make a note, okay, look in your book, but these are what deem it to be a grantor trust. Okay, these are the main items that will deem it as a grantor trust. And if it is a grantor trust, it's kind of half a dozen in one and six in the other, right? Whatever that expression is. Sometimes you get more favorable tax treatment initially on the income portion of it, but you may not get favorable tax treatment on the gross estate part of it.
Will there be a quiz on this on Monday?
Ooh. Yeah. Yeah, we have 10 quizzes scheduled. I think we only have 13 chapters we're gonna cover. I think one of the chapters we haven't covered yet. I think, well, we're not gonna have a quiz on 14, I don't think we had a quiz on chapter 1, I don't believe. I don't know, I'll have to go back and look. But yeah, this one will definitely be, on the list for quizzes. It's almost November. How many weeks we got in November in school? 3, pretty much. Got Thanksgiving and come back, it's dead week and then finals. We're getting to the nitty gritty. Okay. If you are a non-grantor trust, okay, they will consider you a hybrid entity. Okay, so what that means is if anything is distributed out of the trust, it is taxed to the beneficiary, okay, or like similar to a grantor trust. If as assets accumulate, income just accumulates in there, okay, it's gonna be taxed at the trust rates. Now look at this. Anything for 2024 over $15,200 is taxed at 37%. Okay, in addition to this, okay, this is exactly like the gift tax kind of feeds in. Okay, this is the tax on 15.2, which would be this due, and then anything over that is 37%. So you can see that these are much higher marginal tax rates than would be if you were at the marginal tax rate for personal income tax. Okay, so a simple trust versus a complex trust. A simple trust says the assets are in the trust, any income generated from that has to be distributed. Okay, at which point we're gonna get much more favorable tax treatment, okay, obviously depending on what it is, but yes. Okay, a complex trust, so basically you can't mess with the principal on that. You have to distribute the income, it's mandatory, you cannot distribute the principal, you cannot let things accumulate. If you do, it becomes what they call a complex trust. Now you're subject to these kind of tax rules. Okay? Again, the IRS is very, very thorough. They want to make sure that they're getting their money, one way or the other. Okay, used to, this was not quite as complicated or what would you call it, penalizing as it is now. And any benefits to charity are subject to this because you're probably getting charitable deductions anyway. Any questions? It's all making sense? All kind of reasoning, what's going on? A lot of this you won't have to be worried about too much for your case study, okay? I don't really want to see you trying to go through this and do a tax return for a trust. Go back. We'll talk about Patty and her kids. Give you a quick example. Patty is the mother of 3 children, Charlie, Linus, and Lucy. What does it sound like? Anybody? Don't make me feel that old. Charlie Brown, there we go. Alright. Look Patty. She established 3 trusts, each one naming one child as the income beneficiary, with income distributed at the discretion of the trustee, and naming the income beneficiary's children as remainder beneficiaries. So basically her grandkids. Okay, so this is the split interest trust. The discretion of the income is that at the discretion, okay, the distribution of income is at the discretion of the trustee. So Patty funded each trust in such a manner that the trust income will remain in the lowest marginal tax bracket for trusts, if not distributed in the income beneficiary. So what kind of trust would this be? Simple or complex? Complex trust, thank you very much. How come?
Because it's not distributed.
Sure, if it's a simple trust, all the income has to be distributed to the beneficiary. And all that flows through the marginal tax bracket of the income beneficiary. Okay, since each trust is substantially different in terms of beneficiaries, each trust will be taxed separately. Okay, yeah, so let's talk about this. Okay, so again, simple and complex trusts. Okay, a lender establishes a trust that is required to pay income to Neville each year and gives the trustee discretion to distribute principal to Neville's daughter, Sammy. Is that simple or complex? If they distribute principal.
Complex.
Complex again, right? Because they have the power to distribute the principal. In year 1, the trustee distributes trust income to Neville as required, but does not use the discretionary power to make distribution to Sammy. So in this one, in year 1, it is taxed as a simple trust. In year 2, okay, basically they decide to distribute some principal to Sammy. So in year 2, becomes a complex trust. Okay, so once it goes, it can go back and forth. That was the kind of the goal of this one. In year 3, they kind of follow the same pattern as year 1, so it reverts back to a simple trust. Okay, so it really just depends on what happens each year. Once you do one, you're not stuck in that forever. Okay, let's talk about gift tax to the trust. So if it's a revocable trust, okay, and it's a grantor, okay, I'm sorry. Revocable trusts are grantor trusts for gift tax purposes, okay, which means they are not completed gifts. They're not subject to gift tax because they have not given up complete control of the property for the beneficiary of somebody else. That's kind of the definition of a completed gift. So if it's not a completed gift, there was no gift tax on there. But you're still subject to income tax or trust tax. Now, irrevocable trust, because once you make the decision to do this, you cannot take it back. They often are considered completed gifts for gift tax purposes. Okay, and any income interest, especially if it's taken out during that year, okay, can be utilized. You can utilize the annual exclusion amount. Now, in remainder interest, let's say the trust is for a 10-year term, and the rest is supposed to be administered to the grandkids, like in the other example, okay, it's still a completed gift of future interest, but it's a future interest So you cannot use the annual exclusion. This is where the crummy provisions will come into play. You could put a bunch of money in there, right? It was a future gift, because at the end, they'll probably get the rest of all those proceeds. But as long as you give them the 5x5 provision, 5,000 or 5% of the trust assets, you can use up to the annual exclusion to avoid gift taxes on them, because it created a gift of present interest. It's all coming together. So coffee? You drag a coffee pot up here next time?
I'm just telling myself over and over again, gotta get in bed before 11 tonight.
We'll be out of class way before then. All right, any questions about the revocable and gift tax and irrevocable? Does it make sense? Okay, this is in the book, we're not gonna go over this, okay? But we're moving down. We can talk a lot about that. Gift tax, estate tax that goes to state, estate tax, adjustable tax on gifts, okay? And then we'll get into generation skipping taxes. This is where if you go two and a half generations down, they tax you again. Crazy. Okay. Revocable trust are inter vivos trust. Okay, inter vivos trust just means it was made during life. And that makes sense, right? If I have the possibility to revoke it back, I have to be alive to do that. Okay? So I can't do this if I'm dead. Okay? Irrevocable trusts can be either made during life or they can be created at death. Okay, this would be what they call a springing action trust. Now, obviously, when you die, you can't revoke it back, so this is obviously why it becomes, this fits into this category. But sometimes you can make gifts irrevocably, okay, during your life.
When it says can be either, what is either what? Either
Yes, I'm sorry.
Vivos or?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Inter vivos or testamentary. And this one you have to be alive, okay, to have the possibility to revoke it back. I'll clean that up for next year. Okay, now let's talk about some common trusts, okay? There's a standby trust, which is waiting for a triggering event at that point, okay? Sometimes this is the death of somebody, that this trust is on standby, ready to go in effect if some event happens. Sometimes they can be incapacitated, right? Sometimes a trust will receive assets from another trust. Maybe the trust documents say the assets are not to exceed $1 million in benefit or asset value. So at which point they would design the second trust, right, to receive assets from another source. For definitional purposes, it can be funded or unfunded. Okay, now this is probably why it might be unfunded. If you have a standby trust that the triggering event hasn't happened yet, okay, it's an unfunded trust, there's nothing in there. Now when this event happens, okay, it'll trigger that this assets will now be held in trust. And if you make a lot of money, like ridiculous amounts of money, and you want to leave $100 million to your German Shepherd, okay, which is, I think actually happened, I think it was a German Shepherd. This is the type of trust you would use, okay? This is actually one that they say it has no ascertainable beneficiary. And a lot of times these are for the care of pets, okay? In the event somebody passes away. And will terminate at the death of the last pet.
What if somebody has a pet tiger?
Hey, look.
Donates it to a zoo and they have an honorary trust for the zoo.
And the tiger gets to eat like
Tons of food.
just a fat tiger. Yeah,
Just a fat tiger.
Set that up. Yeah, for sure.
I bet you they have that for zoos.
I don't know. I think most people who have exotic animals like that either get them confiscated. I don't know if they really donate them.
Are they?
I have a friend that has a zebra in her backyard, and I don't know what they do with it.
Zebras aren't illegal. You can have zebras.
Yeah.
They're nothing
There's
special.
horses.
But what do you do if you die? Who
Yeah,
takes
but
care of the
they're-
It's the
zebra?
same as a horse.
They're more dangerous, right? Obviously, they're not domesticated.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
It's the same with reindeer and stuff. People that keep reindeer on their property and whatnot.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
but they do that to eat them.
They,
There are
that's the same
reindeer
reason
breeders.
people have like zebras and stuff.
Yeah, I guess people.
People don't eat zebras.
Well, people will pay. No. People will pay like
No. People don't.
you
pay
have like
to eat
1,000
zebras.
acres. Let's say you got 1,000 acres and you have high fence, like 10-foot fence,
Yeah.
all around your property. They'll put like reindeer, caribou, some
Yeah,
some
but that's-
crazy exotic animal, and then people will pay to come in their land and hunt.
Reindeer and
You know the
caribou,
Tiger King?
crazy exotic. Okay.
For Texas, I guess.
For
You're
Texas,
You're allowed to hunt reindeer.
if it's your own reindeer.
I don't think reindeer are exotic animals. I think they're
For
just a type
Texas,
of
you
deer.
seen reindeer in Texas?
Might have. A few
Well-
times here and there.
Maybe, given that it is one
Did
of the
deer
choice.
tape two bigger horns, I guess?
It's because people don't want to go up to Alaska or
I bet
something
you've
to
never
kill a
seen
reindeer.
unicorn, but I have. I've got unicorns.
The unicorn trust, right?
Yeah, it's gonna go.
This is
right
on
around
footage,
the corner.
Sandon. Come
We'll
on.
pull it up after we look up the 1,000-year trust, okay? All right, so this inter vivos revocable trust would be a trust made during life if the grantor has opportunity to revoke if they need to. Now, this is important because if you want to avoid probate, this is a good way to start. Was to initiate one of these when you're alive. Your privacy is maintained. This probate is public, is that correct? The terms will be confidential, as long as, to the extent that you want them to be confidential. And it's much harder to contest a trust than it is a will. So these are really good for people. These are very common type of trust that people make. But people who still want the opportunity to revoke it, maybe I want to change it, maybe I change my mind, I want the assets back. Okay, this is probably the most common type of trust.
Is there like a
Vivos.
early penalty or something like that for revoking a trust?
No, I mean, if you are the grantor and it is your property initially, you can terminate the trust at will. Now, there might be a bank fee associated with that, because if they're the ones that were, you don't necessarily need a bank to be the trustee, but they're very common, or they're the ones that'll handle that. They also have the bank accounts where you put cash in it, it's probably held in one of the bank accounts. Again, not effective for reducing estate taxes, because you still have your fingers into it. Okay, inter vivos irrevocable, I'm alive, I cannot take this decision back. This is a completed gift. So gift taxes may apply, but also you can also use the annual exclusion in this one. So sometimes you might want to fund this little by little. Now, not all, the remainder part, okay, the income part will be a gift for present interest, the remainder part will be the future interest, so you won't be able to use the annual exclusion for that one. This is what I was talking about earlier, you can use the Crummy provision to every year extend that annual exclusion. So it's all coming together now. I think our next chapter is charitable giving. I think so. Yes. I know, I'm up here lecturing and a lot of people have questions, but this is why I like the case studies, because then you start to actually apply it. Is there anything that's not making sense here? Because a lot of this is really utilizing chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, and all this is getting wrapped up in chapter 8 because we're talking about trust a lot. So I can imagine this next exam is gonna be a layered, questions are gonna be kind of layered. This is gonna be important. Identifying when you can use the annual exclusion and what type of trust, irrevocable or irrevocable, okay? And how do you establish, all right, a gift present interest if it's only a remainder? You give them the opportunity to utilize the common provision. Okay, life insurance trust. It's called an Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust, an ILIT. Okay, somebody, before I give it all away, why would you want to put your life insurance in a trust?
Probably take care of like.
That's not included in your gross estate.
Perfect, that's exactly it. Okay, Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust. It allows you, right, to put this life insurance into a trust. There is a 3-year look-back period, okay, for life insurance, so it will be excluded in your gross estate if you live longer. But you have no incidence of ownership now. That life insurance policy, you know, usually whether it's on you or somebody else, okay, it will now be subject to the terms of the trust. And it's removed from your gross estate, but it's irrevocable, okay, that's the one thing. Okay, now, a bypass trust, not quite as useful anymore. Sometimes it is. But we'll talk about this in chapter 11. If, you know, I have a lifetime exclusion, right, the 13.8 million, I think it is this year, 13.6, whatever it is. My wife also has that exclusion, okay? If I don't use mine, I can transfer mine to her. Okay, now, what happened was that was not always the case. So what I would do, before I could port, it's called portability, transfer my lifetime exclusion to my wife, I would put all this into the trust, pay the gift tax associated with it, which would utilize my lifetime exclusion. Then now, okay, it would bypass my wife's gross estate, because now this property, a lot of it's held, okay, out of my, because I'm dead now, and my wife has no control over it. So it was another opportunity to transfer my unused exclusion, okay, before you could transfer it. Now, sometimes this is important, because now you can use this lifetime exclusion, you can transfer it to your wife. But if you have an investment of highly appreciating property or investment, this might still be a good opportunity for you to transfer it right away, freeze the value of that asset from your gross estate, utilize your exclusion, okay, and transfer it to your children. So it's not completely useless, but it's not really as beneficial as it was. Okay. The rest of these, we're gonna go through kind of quickly, okay? They're just different types of trusts. You can look these up in the book. They got some really, really good examples. Okay, qualified a QTIP, okay, these are very, very common. So basically, it grants the surviving spouse a lifetime right to the income while transferring the property to the grantor's choosing. So this is gonna be kind of like a GRAT, but specifically for spouses. We've already talked about these last class. Qualified personal residence trust, transfer personal property trust, terminal personal property trust. Okay, GRAT and GRUT. Okay, we talked about this last class. What you want to focus on these is how they identify the income distribution. Some of these are a fixed percentage of the asset value, okay, some are not. This one, okay, has to be reevaluated all the time. So if you have a hard to value asset, this is not a good one to look for. So just keep an eye on how, probably this, how do they value the income, okay, how much money is going to be coming out. Okay. I'm not gonna go through all these. If you wanna take a photo, you can. But these are just, we can go on. They're all different types of trusts, okay, that we could talk about. But for the most part, I'm not gonna say I'm not. This one's probably pretty valuable, we'll talk about, right? We talked about those last class too, though. This was the effective trust I talked to you about. We set up in a manner where the income, right, is gonna be taxed at the beneficiary's income tax. And not the trust tax laws. Then of course you have trust for minors. I won't question you on the sections, but I think that's a very common use of trust. Okay, then we have a lot more. So, again, I'm not gonna walk you through every single one of these. I think you can go through and read. There's really good examples in the book for all this.
You can take away an irrevocable trust.
Yeah, yes, you can modify it, alright? Usually the court, okay, will, if something happens in a manner of divorce, I don't know, a lot of scenarios where the judge can come in and say, look, this needs to be modified because of, it needs to be fair for everybody going forward. Now, you can decant assets. Now, where it says modify, like this decanting process, it's gonna go to another trust with similar circumstances.
I like the some decantor.
Sorry.
So you can't change the beneficiary or something?
A lot of these are still gonna be subject to the same conditions that was required before. Now, I don't wanna say nothing's irrevocable. I'm almost guarantee that you get a good enough lawyer, you can go, but for our purposes, we're gonna define revocable and revocable trust. Mostly for gross estate purposes. Again, if you want to, you can take a trust trust law course, and then it'll tell you how to do all this process. Okay. What are the two most common types of beneficiaries? Okay, say again?
Mine.
No, okay, let's talk about, we had two types of beneficiaries, right? Remainder and what else?
Income.
There we go. What is the spendthrift clause, why is it included?
You can't, the beneficiary can't put up anything in the trust as, like collateral.
Yep.
Or go take out one.
Yep. For sure, that's a really good one, it's additional creditor protection on this, okay? For somebody who maybe, what they may be a spendthrift, is exactly what it is, maybe they need help managing their own assets. How is a testamentary trust created? Anybody?
At death.
So what do you have to do?
Die.
You have to die. Give me an email, and give me some response again. What are the most common reasons for using a revocable trust? Does the revocable trust lower gross estate?
Just to hold assets.
That's true.
So you can revoke it.
Avoid probate.
Void probate, what was the other one?
Minimize taxes.
So you can revoke it.
Just sorry, yeah. I want the right to revoke this trust, okay? A lot of it's particularly to avoid probate, okay? Because you doesn't remove from your gross estate, you cannot use your annual exclusion because it's not a completed gift, things like that. Anybody?
One has money in it, one doesn't.
One has money, one doesn't.
Or one has some.
How can the creation of a trust reduce estate taxes?
Doesn't.
Skip probate.
You can remove
Oh, it has to be
portions of your
irrevocable,
estate,
right?
so you're.
I thought revocable trusts don't do this.
Say again?
I thought revocable trusts don't avoid estate taxes.
Does it say revocable up there?
I think it was.
No?
But that's good, you remember that though. This whole transfer of appreciated property is a real big deal. And that's how we're freezing those valuable assets for our purposes when we consider our gross estate. Even if we have to pay gift tax on this, okay, it's all we're paying on. And if it goes up to be $100 million, all that appreciated property is now, I don't have to pay transfer taxes on that.
So I'm gonna take notes from now on.
See?
I'm gonna put in timestamps.
Okay, fair enough.
And I can just boop.